If you survive the birth, human girl, I will make you immortal. They say love demands commitment. Mine demanded my execution. I didn't fall for a man. I collided with an entity who viewed my mortality not as a tragedy, but as an insult. He offered me eternity in a chalice that tasted of iron and dead stars. The bargain was simple, yet terrifying. Destroy the girl I was to forge the goddess he required. As he held my life and death in his ancient hands, I heard only one vow echoing through my agony and my ecstasy. If you survive the birth, human girl, I will make you immortal. My name is Willa Sterling, 21, and the familiar scent of salt air and pine in Cedar Creek, Oregon, had become a shroud. It was October, the month my life stopped being mine. I sat on the porch swing, the wood creaking a rhythm of normalcy that felt painfully false. Everything around me, the chipped paint, the sound of gulls, was temporary, a stage set waiting for the curtain to fall. My best friend, Theodore Vance, 22, leaned against the railing, his easygoing smile failing to reach his protective eyes. You haven't slept, Willa. The gold light around your eyes is practically humming. I lifted a hand to the cold metal of the obsidian amulet hanging at my throat. It felt heavier every day, a metaphysical tether to a reality I desperately wanted to reject. It's getting louder, Theo. The truth, I mean. It's always been an echo in my bones, but now it's a roar. He represented the fleeting, beautiful simplicity of human life that Caleb Thorne was poised to erase. Theodore Vance, grounded and loyal, tried to anchor me to the world of movie nights and college applications. But Caleb's shadow was too immense. The air shifted, heavy and ozone-thick, before I even saw him. The sound of a car engine, too deep, too smooth, split the quiet afternoon. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was an imposition, an aggressive statement of intent. Caleb Thorne, who appeared 35 but carried the profound weight of eons, stepped out of the black sedan. He moved with a devastating, controlled grace that belonged on a different plane of existence. His dark, penetrating eyes locked onto mine, stripping away the comfort of the moment, assessing the durability of my human shell. Willa, his voice was a low, velvet thunder. It didn't ask. It commanded attention. He ignored Theodore completely, viewing him as little more than highly organized dust. Go inside, Theo, I whispered, pushing myself off the swing. I didn't want him witnessing this. I didn't want him seeing the absolute, terrifying surrender that Caleb demanded, and that a treacherous part of me already offered. I'm not leaving you alone with him, Theodore protested, stepping forward, his broad shoulders squared in a futile display of human protection. Caleb merely turned his head, and the intensity of his gaze didn't hold malice, but the absolute certainty of superior power. It was the look a sculptor gives to a lump of raw clay, not a man to a rival. The air crackled. Theodore stumbled back, clutching his head, a soundless pressure wave forcing him toward the house. The defiance of the decree started then, right there in the mundane setting of Cedar Creek. You have no right to treat him, or me, like this, I spat, clutching the obsidian amulet so tightly the metal dug into my skin. He pulled a brittle, rolled parchment from inside his coat, the Covenant Scroll. It radiated an oppressive heat, smelling of forgotten civilizations and raw celestial energy. Reject the decree, I challenged, though my voice trembled. I am not a sacrifice or a bargaining chip. I am human. I have choices. His hand shot out, not touching me, but seizing my will. A cold, alien power flooded my senses, momentarily paralyzing my fear with a wave of absolute, terrifying love. That is the fallacy of your fleeting species, Willa, Caleb murmured, his breath brushing my ear. You confuse fragility with free will. Your choice was made for you the moment you inherited the marking on your soul. Your human life is merely the prologue to an immense, perilous trial. You were born for the birth, girl. The demonstration of his power was brief but devastating. The old oak tree beside the porch, a stalwart sentinel of my childhood, groaned under an unseen force. Its roots tore loose from the earth with a sound like shattering glass, and the ancient trunk split cleanly down the middle, collapsing into the yard. The irreversible nature of the contract had been violently impressed upon me. There was no going back to simple college life. The world of Cedar Creek was officially over. The transition was immediate and brutal. Within hours, I was gone from the coastal town, transported to the Ethelred estate. It was a hidden fortress, a gothic nightmare of isolation, nestled in perpetual twilight. It was Caleb's timeless sanctuary, and now, my prison. The next few weeks of October were a blur of intense, agonizing training. Caleb didn't teach me how to fight. He taught me how to endure. He stripped away the veneer of human resilience, forcing me to confront the core strength he claimed lay beneath. "Your mortality is a weakness, Willa," he'd instruct during our midnight sessions in the estate's hidden crypt. "It is pain and eventual cessation. The transformation is not merely a change of state. It is the violent creation of a timeless soul. If you cannot survive the pressure now, you will shatter at the threshold." His devotion was absolute, a frightening possessiveness that both terrified and sustained me. He watched me with relentless intensity, sometimes holding my hand, his immense power banked, offering a moment of true tenderness. Yet, even in those moments, I could feel him measuring my durability, waiting for the gold flash in my hazel eyes that signaled the awakening of my latent energy. "Why me?" I demanded one night, exhaustion making me reckless. "Why not just wait for the next generation?" Caleb stood before a massive stone fireplace, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. "Because you are the strongest, Willa. You carry the purest strain of the contracted lineage, and because, unlike the others, I cannot bear the thought of watching you perish naturally. Your vulnerability is an insult to my affections." That was the heart of the paradox. He kept me alive only so he could subject me to a trial that might kill me, all for the agonizing, irresistible reward of forever by his side. The calendar turned. The winter solstice approached, the appointed date for the birth threshold. The estate grew silent with anticipation. I was shown the path to the Chronos Chasm. It was a subterranean cavern far beneath the estate, a metaphysical point of ancient energy convergence, unstable and dangerous. The air down there didn't feel like air. It felt like compressed centuries. The ceiling dripped with energy, not water. Caleb led me to the center of the chasm, where a massive, rough-hewn stone altar stood. Upon it rested the sempiternal chalice, a ritualistic vessel forged from unknown metal, pulsating with a sickly blue light. It was cold, deep, and large enough to contain the catalyst, the concentrated essence that would initiate the catastrophic transition. My fear reached a crescendo that day. This was it. The prologue was over. "Are you certain, Willa?" Caleb asked, his hand resting on the chalice, his voice thick with a strange mix of regret and anticipation. "This is the last moment of your human life. Once the contents of the chalice are consumed, the process begins. Few survive the internal war." I looked at Caleb, at the imposing figure, the sharp bone structure, the ancient promise etched in his expression. I saw the absolute expectation, the demand for my worthiness. He needed me to prove I was strong enough to stand beside him, stripped of mortality and pain. "If I shatter," I choked out, "will you mourn?" His sharp features softened into an expression of excruciating pain. "If you shatter, I will cease to exist. You are not just my counterpart, Willa. You are my contract, my destiny, and the key to my future. I cannot fail this, and neither can you." The climax was upon us. Caleb moved, his movements precise and ritualistic. He carefully poured a shimmering, opalescent liquid into the sempiternal chalice. The vessel flared bright, throwing dancing shadows across the cavern walls. He lifted the chalice, presenting it to me, the vessel containing my future and my potential oblivion. His dark eyes drilled into mine, and his voice, imbued with the power of ages, echoed against the stone walls of the Chronos Chasm, solidifying the vow that had defined my entire existence. "Drink this, Willa Sterling. Endure the shattering. Fight the fire." He paused, his gaze burning with devastating intensity, his final absolute decree ringing through the chasm. "If you survive the birth, human girl, I will make you immortal." I reached out, my hand steady despite the violent tremor in my heart. The fear was still there, a knot of ice in my stomach, but beneath it, the resilient, intensely passionate core he saw in me finally asserted itself. I wouldn't do this for the contract, or even for the promise of forever. I would do it for the terrible, irresistible desire to stand beside this impossible being, not as a fragile woman, but as his equal. I brought the sempiternal chalice to my lips. The liquid was cold, metallic, and tasted of starlight and iron. The moment it passed my throat, the world exploded. It wasn't pain, it was dissolution. Every nerve ending screamed as my human anatomy began to unravel, a cataclysmic transformation ignited by the catalyst. It felt like being simultaneously burned alive and flash frozen. The golden light in my hazel eyes surged, no longer a flash, but a blinding internal supernova. I collapsed onto the cold stone, the chalice clattering away, the world fractured into light and agony. Caleb's powerful hands caught me, anchoring me as the metamorphosis raged. I heard a primal guttural scream, and realized it was mine, the sound of a soul violently shedding its mortality. The fire inside me raged for what felt like centuries. It was the ultimate test of worthiness, the fragile human heart enduring the violent creation of a timeless soul. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the destruction coalesced into creation. The screaming stopped, the burning stabilized. I took a breath, but it wasn't the shallow, vulnerable breath of Willa Sterling, the human girl. It was a deep, resonating intake of power. The pain vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of crystalline clarity and permanence. I opened my eyes. They were no longer hazel. They were solid, molten gold, stable and intense. I looked up at Caleb. His expression was no longer anxious or demanding, but relieved, profoundly satisfied, and overflowing with adoration. "You survived, Willa," he breathed, his voice thick with ancient emotion. He lowered his head, not as a master to a subject, but as a counterpart to his equal. When his lips met mine, the kiss was not merely passion. It was a merging of two timeless souls, forged in fire and defined by an unbreakable decree. The contract was fulfilled. The human girl was gone. I was immortal. Forever had begun. The crystalline clarity that followed the cataclysmic transformation was not merely the absence of pain. It was the birth of true perception. The residual tremor that had defined my human heart was gone, replaced by a seismic stillness. I still lay on the cold stone of the Chronos chasm, but the ground no longer pressed against me. I felt instead an intrinsic connection to the ancient energy surging through the cavern floor. I was no longer Willa, the girl who feared the end. I was something forged, something permanent. Caleb's hands, powerful anchors throughout the shattering, were still beneath me. When he spoke, his voice resonated not just in my ears, but in the new deep core of my being, a core that felt like compressed starlight. "Look at me, Willa. Truly look," he instructed, a profound command that held no trace of the demanding master, but only the awe of a counterpart witnessing a successful creation. I raised my head. The molten gold in my eyes had stabilized, lending an unblinking intensity to my vision. I didn't just see Caleb. I saw the intricate, ancient network of power that composed his existence. His imposing figure, his sharp bone structure, the dark penetration of his gaze. They were simply the surface of an endless, terrifyingly beautiful enigma. I saw the millennia etched into the structure of his soul, and for the first time, I understood the depth of the loneliness that had driven his obsessive need for my survival. "I see you, Caleb," I murmured, and the sound of my own voice was transformed, low, resonant, carrying a faint echo of the chasm's own power. The obsidian amulet, which I still wore, no longer felt like a tether or a monitor. It felt redundant. Its energy, previously used to monitor my frail human vitality, was now simply flowing into the boundless well of my own being. I reached up and unclasped it, the cold metal surprisingly dull in my newly sensitized fingers. "The protection is no longer necessary," I stated, dropping the amulet onto the rough stone. It landed with a hollow clink, a final small sound marking the end of my vulnerability. Caleb watched the action, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his classically handsome face. Indeed, that vessel was designed for the transient. "You, my love, are eternal." He helped me stand. The simple action was startling. Where before my body was a mechanism of bone and muscle susceptible to fatigue, now it was an engine of pure, controlled force. I stood taller, straighter, and the air of the Chronos chasm, once thick and oppressive, felt like fine wine to my new senses. a heady, invigorating rush of raw metaphysics. The sempiternal chalice lay tipped over nearby. It was empty, the catalyst fully absorbed. The blue light that had pulsed from it during the ritual had dimmed, having fulfilled its catastrophic purpose. The human girl is gone, I confirmed, testing the phrase on my tongue. There was no sadness, only acceptance of an absolute truth. And the promise? Caleb reached out and cupped my cheek. His touch, always warm and overwhelming, was now perfectly balanced with mine. Two forces acknowledging one another. No longer a collision, but a fusion. The vow is absolute, Willa, he affirmed. You survived the internal war. You endured the fire. You are immortal. You are mine, and I am yours, without reservation or limit, for all time. This was the true reward, not just the absence of death, but the undeniable, unshakable parity with him. The power dynamic that had dictated our relationship, the ancient being and the fragile human, was permanently erased. A new ritual was required to confirm the covenant in this new reality. Caleb retrieved the covenant scroll, which he had set aside. It still radiated heat, but now, when I looked at the brittle parchment, I could read the celestial language of the decree, not just intellectually, but intrinsically. The contract was not merely a document, it was a vibrational blueprint of our shared destiny. He did not need to bind me. He needed to acknowledge my place. Caleb picked up the sempiternal chalice once more. Instead of filling it with the catalyst, he used a sharp shard of obsidian, broken from the altar stone itself, to make a shallow cut on his palm. A single, dark, shimmering drop of his ancient blood, a fluid that smelled of power and ozone, fell into the chalice. He presented the vessel to me. A mutual covenant, Willa. This completes the bond. Not of servitude, but of shared dominion. I took the obsidian shard without hesitation. The idea of pain was absurd. My skin was now a fortress, but the shard cut easily, responding to the ancient power I commanded. A drop of my own new blood, now shimmering with a golden light, fell to mingle with his in the chalice. The mixture immediately began to glow, emitting a low, powerful hum that vibrated through the stone chasm. We both lifted the chalice, our hands clasped around the metal. We did not drink the mixture. That type of binding was for the old magic. Instead, Caleb tilted the chalice, allowing the mixed, shining blood to spill onto the covenant scroll. The parchment instantly ignited, not with flame, but with pure, white light. It burned away, leaving no ashes, just a residual scent of forgotten civilizations and raw celestial energy. The terms of the contract were now etched into the very fabric of our shared existence, sealed not in ink, but in essence. The moment the scroll vanished, a wave of knowledge flooded my mind. I saw snippets of his history, felt the crushing weight of his solitary millennia, and understood the terrifying scope of the power we now shared. I was no longer merely Willa Sterling. I was the eternal counterpart, the immortal result of the decree. "We are complete," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with a relief that transcended years, reaching back into eons. This incredible transformation brought with it a cold, sharp realization about the life I had discarded. My thoughts drifted momentarily back to the small coastal town, to the fleeting comfort of Cedar Creek, and to the human boy I had left behind, Theodore. I saw him, not with the emotional turmoil of goodbye, but with the detached, crystalline clarity of my new nature. He was still loyal, still grounded, but now he was impossibly fragile, defined by an impermanent, vulnerable existence. The memory of his easygoing smile, his protective stance against Caleb, felt infinitely distant, like a lovely, fading photograph. I felt a detached wave of regret for the pain I had caused him, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could never return to his world, that life was truly over, sealed behind the collapsed oak tree and the vanished covenant scroll. He represented common human vulnerability, and I had shed that vulnerability violently to earn my destiny. "Theo will grieve," I said, the observation flat, immutable. Caleb followed my internal train of thought with ease. "He will, but human grief is as fleeting as their lives. He will heal and forget the impossible. He has the blessing of mortality. He does not have to endure the vastness we face." His words, once harsh, now felt merely factual. He wasn't cruel. He was stating the differential equation of lifespans. I looked around the Chronos chasm one last time. It was still unstable and dangerous, but now it felt like a crucible of success, not a place of execution. The transformation, the birth threshold, was successfully crossed. "Show me the dawn of our forever," I challenged him, my gold eyes locking on his dark ones. He nodded, his pleasure palpable. He took my hand, not leading me, but walking beside me. Our joined hands felt like a single unit of power, perfectly complementary. We ascended from the subterranean cavern. The climb was effortless, a mere suggestion of movement for my new body. As we emerged into the depths of the Ethelred estate, the Gothic architecture no longer felt oppressive or isolated. It felt like the correct setting for endless time. The halls, filled with ancient lore and forbidden artifacts, seemed to hum in recognition of my newly immortal presence. The winter solstice was upon us, but now the date was irrelevant. Time had ceased to be a measurement of decline and had become merely a medium through which we moved. "You earned this, Willa," he said, pulling me into his embrace. The possessiveness was still there, woven into the very fabric of his love, but it was now laced with a profound respect. "You proved that the fragile essence of a human heart could endure the violent creation of a timeless soul." He tipped my head back, looking into the depth of my molten gold eyes. The expression of demanding expectation was gone, replaced by absolute, eternal adoration. "You are not merely my contract fulfillment, Willa. You are my culmination," he confessed, a rare vulnerability showing in the ancient depths of his eyes. "I was bound to your lineage to guarantee my own continuity, but I chose you for your strength, for your resilience, and for the sheer, bright intensity of your spirit." Our kiss, then, was the final seal, a merging that held the weight of all the centuries he had lived and all the centuries we would now share. It was passion unbound by mortality, a promise that stretched beyond the confines of light and time. I was immortal. The fragile human was reborn as an entity of pure power. The agonizing, irresistible reward of forever by his side was no longer a hope, but a reality. The profound stillness that settled after the burning of the Covenant scroll felt like the deep, silent breath of a new universe. Time did not merely stop. It reorganized itself around the two of us. I moved away from Caleb, needing to internalize this new reality, this engine of pure force that now defined my body. The shadows in the grand library of the Ethelred estate, which had once felt heavy and foreboding, now seemed porous, inviting the subtle manipulation of my will. I focused on a heavy bronze bust of an unknown ancient king, resting upon a marble pedestal 20 feet away. In my human life, lifting it would have been a strain. Now, I simply thought of its weightlessness. The bust rose silently, floating 3 inches above the marble. I watched it, not with surprise, but with clinical satisfaction. My molten gold eyes analyzed the energy required. It was negligible. It was not magic. It was physics redefined by my new state of being. Caleb leaned against the massive oak desk, watching the demonstration with proprietary pride. His gaze held the deep penetration I was accustomed to, yet it lacked the underlying tension of his former expectation. He no longer worried if I was strong enough. "A simple exercise," he remarked, his voice a low vibration that resonated perfectly with the new frequency of my own. "The physical mastery is instantaneous. The mental, however, requires refinement." I lowered the bust, letting it settle back onto the marble with the gentlest tap, a controlled return that spoke volumes of my immediate precision. "You always spoke of this power as a reward," I stated, turning to face him, "but it feels like a native language I had forgotten." He pushed off the desk, moving toward me with an impossible grace that I now matched step for step. We met in the center of the vast room, 2 equal points of intense power. He opened the book. The pages were covered in archaic script and complex diagrams. I glanced down, and instantly, the script translated itself in my mind, flowing like a clear, cold stream of logic. I understood the architecture of ancient protections, the weakness of celestial antagonists, and the intricate workings of the dimensional veil. My human mind would have shattered under the weight of such sudden, immense knowledge. My new soul merely absorbed it. "The greatest difficulty of the transformation is the transition from localized emotion to eternal perspective," Caleb continued, his dark eyes intense. "Mortals feel loss intensely because their time is brief. We feel it fundamentally, because our memories are endless. The joy, the regret, the devotion, they become permanent fixtures in the tapestry of our existence. Regret for Theodore is already a permanent fixture, I admitted. The memory of his protective, easygoing smile, sharp but distant. It was no longer a human ache, but a cold acknowledgement of a severed reality. Then we must ensure that permanent fixture is sealed in the past, Caleb said, his implacable nature returning with a practical edge. Cedar Creek is a location of human comfort. It represents the life you abandoned. While human eyes cannot now perceive you, the residue of the birth, the disruption of the metaphysical lines, may still be traceable by others who seek the kind of power we now share. The true threat was not human law or human grief. It was the unseen ancient competition that existed outside the fleeting human realm. We need to erase the possibility of residue, I concluded, already knowing the answer. The final severance had to be absolute. Precisely. We seal the periphery, Caleb confirmed. It is the last act of a mortal life, performed by the newly immortal. The air around us grew still. This was the defining moment, the definitive action that would close the door on the name Willa Sterling and fully embrace the power of Caleb's eternal counterpart. The agonizing price of forever was not the pain of the birth, but the necessary, deliberate erasure of all human ties. How? I asked. Speed, Caleb replied, a hint of something wild and exhilarating in his eyes. And control. We will reach the coastal town and use our shared energy to weave a permanent veil of forgetfulness, specific to your connection to that place. He took my hand, not with demanding force, but with the familiarity of a co-pilot. His touch, a moment before, was balanced. Now, as we prepared to engage our speed, our combined power flared, making the contact feel like a conduit for raw lightning. We left the Ethelred estate instantly. The blur was not a sensation of movement, but of instantaneous translation. The Gothic shadows of the mansion vanished, replaced by the salty, cold air of the coast. We were at the furthest edge of Cedar Creek, the small town's lights visible in the distance. The mundane glow a stark contrast to the eternal twilight we had just left. My new senses screamed with the presence of humanity. The sound of a distant car, the scent of a neighbor's dinner, the low, steady thrum of Theodore's vulnerable, fleeting vitality, all were loud and overwhelming. I clamped down on the sensory overload instantly, focusing my control. I could perceive every single ephemeral life in that small town, and the realization was staggering. I had transcended their reality completely. The barrier must feel natural to them, Caleb instructed, his voice low and focused. A shift in perception, not a magical wall. They will believe that Willa simply left, moved on. No reason to look deeper, no trace of the celestial decree. This was the climax of my human experience, not the birth, but the cold, rational decision to permanently sever the ties that bound me to empathy. I reached out, extending my non-physical self towards the perimeter of the town. My power flowed, cold and golden. It felt like weaving threads of pure existence, creating a permanent, impermeable filter. I saw a flash of Theodore in my mind, standing on the damp sand, tossing a stone into the gray water, his expression worried. He was defined by the loss of me, yet bound by the simple human ability to move on. Caleb was right. He had the blessing of mortality. He would heal and eventually forget the impossible magnitude of what I had become. Forgetting is kinder than the truth, I thought, pushing the golden energy harder. Focus on the mundane, Caleb guided, standing shoulder to shoulder with me, his immense power flowing into my own, amplifying the effect. Make the ordinary the explanation. I saw the tapestry of Cedar Creek, the routine, the simple loves, the predictable future, and I wove my denial into that fabric. Willa Sterling had simply packed a bag and left. No celestial contract, no ancient entity. The energy flared between Caleb and me, a brilliant, gold and black corona against the dark coastal night. The sheer force of this metaphysical act was overwhelming, a testament to the magnitude of the shared dominion we now commanded. This was infinitely more satisfying than the struggle of the birth. This was the implementation of the reward. When the weaving was complete, the coastal air shifted. The sensory noise of the town dulled, not because I was suppressing it, but because the connection was physically severed. Cedar Creek was now an echo, Shielded from the vastness of our eternal reality, I lowered my power, breathing in the cold air. It was done. The defiance of the decree was long over. This was the final, total surrender to the decree's fulfillment. "It holds," Caleb confirmed, studying the subtle ripple of the barrier we had just created. He turned to me, his imposing figure framed by the ordinary lights of a town we would never re-enter. "No mortal will ever trace you, Willa. You are irrevocably beyond their reach." He cupped my face again, his touch now entirely familiar, entirely complimentary. "We have faced the internal war, the trial, and the severance. What remains now?" I asked, looking past the lights of the town and out into the vast open ocean, an eternity of time spread before us. Caleb smiled, the expression sharp and possessive, yet undeniably rooted in the love he had fought millennia to possess. "The rest of forever," he whispered. "We have all the epochs to explore, all the challenges to meet, and all the forgotten worlds to conquer. You are the culmination of my destiny, and I am the landscape of yours. We stand in absolute parity, eternal and unchallenged." He brought his mouth down on mine. The kiss was not a desperate sealing of a contract, but a promise of endless shared experience. It was the absolute total merging of two timeless souls, the former human girl and the ancient entity, bound by power, passion, and the fierce, agonizingly earned reality of forever. We turned our backs on the quiet vulnerability of Cedar Creek, stepping instantly into the shadows. The human world was gone, and the eternal world had taken its final, irreversible form. Our story was no longer about survival, but about dominion. It had only just begun its boundless journey, side by side, in the cold, vast eternity that was irrevocably sealed. Like the video, subscribe to the vibe.